It's almost impossible to have a discussion about the world's most beautiful cars without it descending into a fistfight. Beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder, but there is no doubt that some cars are more beautiful than others. Today we're shining the spotlight on the automotive output of Germany, a country that has delivered its fair share of legendary cars, from the likes of Porsche, BMW and Mercedes. When the Germans have got it right, they've delivered some of history's true beauties. Before we get into them though, don't forget to like and share this video, and always remember to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything going on here at Goodwood Road & Racing. Here we go then. Here is our definitive list, in no particular order, of the 9 most beautiful German cars ever made. We'll accept no reasoning to the contrary. When we at GRR think of beauty, we think of smooth lines, sleek bodywork and effortless style. And the Porsche 356 ticks all 3 of those boxes. As the precursor for several other cars featured on this list, the first ever car to bear the Porsche name laid the perfect foundation for what would follow, for what has become one of the most famous manufacturers in the world. The original 356 Roadster was built in 1948 and powered by a 1.1-litre air-cooled 4-cylinder Volkswagen engine that produced just 35 horsepower. Despite that uninspiring powertrain, however, it's those earliest examples that come closest to styling perfection. Later versions, imaginatively labelled the 356A, B and C, were cluttered with distracting chrome details and annoyances like wing mirrors, which ruin the sleek appearance of the original. That sculpted bodywork, draped over the chassis like a silk sheet, is irresistible to the eye. It's clean, it's stylish, and it's beautiful. From the car that started it all for Porsche to the one that nearly ended it all for BMW, the 507 is arguably the most beautiful car to ever leave the Bavarian factory, but those looks came at a price. In 1954, Max Hoffmann, who had also had a hand in the conception of the Porsche 356, convinced BMW to start work on a new sports car that could be sold in the US for around $5,000. A sound strategy, but by the time the first 507s were ready to be shipped over to the Atlantic, the cost of building them meant prices were inflated to more than double that initial forecast. It was a disaster for BMW, who only ended up building 252 507s before the project was scrapped in 1959. The 507 was a disaster then, but good grief is it stunning. BMW was attempting to revive its sporting pedigree with this car, and it certainly achieved that with a shape that preempted the AC Cobra, that didn't arrive until 3 years later. It's sleeker than the Cobra though, with lines in all the right places and sculpted bodywork spiced with sporting flair around the wheel arches and an elegant front grille. The 507's inherent class has been confirmed in more recent years, as several high-profile sales have seen models change hands for millions of pounds. Most recently, the car once owned by Albrecht von Goertz, the man behind the 507's design, which sold for £2,367,000 with Bonham's cars. One of the cars the 507 was trying to emulate was the Mercedes 300 SL, which was a categorical success in comparison. That man Hoffmann also had a major role to play in the development of this car, as he convinced the bosses at Daimler-Benz to start work on a road-going version of the 300 SL racing car that had won at Le Mans in 1952. With extraordinary styling that makes it instantly recognisable, the 300 SL Gullwing is a thing of flawless beauty with exquisite proportions. It looked fast, and it was fast, with a 3-litre straight-six producing 215 horsepower, but you get the feeling that this car would have still been popular if it had a lawnmower engine. Just look at it! How can you not fall instantly in love? Maybe that's why the value of these things has risen into the multi-millions. We'd pay that much for one as well. It does seem that racing cars make quite a good basis for good-looking road cars, and that can definitely be said for the Porsche 904. Maybe we're cheating a little bit here, because the 904 was actually just a racing car that Porsche chose to develop as a road-legal car to meet homologation regulations. Porsche had decided to return to sports car racing in 1962, after an unsuccessful effort in Formula 1, and the 904 was the car that it came up with. Mid-engined and complete with a full interior including a heater, it was far from your standard racing car on the inside, but it was every bit the 60s racer on the outside. The 904's low-slung frame, accented by those bulbous front-wheel arches, creates a perfectly balanced aesthetic that screams aerodynamic efficiency. It's another example of Porsche championing simplicity in its design, and the results are breathtaking. Those big glass headlights only serve to accentuate that sleek front end, and looking at this car, we find ourselves wishing that sports cars still look like this. Okay, so we're cheating with this one a bit too. This is the last racing car on this list. Promise. This one is street legal too though, and you can't create a list of beautiful cars without featuring the work of Giorgio Giugiaro. The BMW M1 was the company's first mid-engine production car, and it remains one of only two, alongside the BMW i8. But like the Porsche 904, the M1 was first conceived as a racing car. It was initially prepared in collaboration with Lamborghini, but the Italian firm would eventually become unable to complete the project, so BMW took over full control and production began in 1978. Giugiaro's design was inspired by the BMW Turbo concept from a few years prior, and the final shape of the M1 is nothing short of perfection. We love a wedge, and this is one of the best examples of that iconic design philosophy. It's so straightforward, but at the same time so iconic with that unmistakable BMW front end. It's no wonder that the BMW N1 Pro Car Championship is revered as one of the coolest racing series in history. There's a saying that beauty is only skin deep. That no longer applies here. The Porsche Carrera GT has a soul to match its angelic visage. Can it really be that this car is now more than 20 years old? Looking at it, it could have been designed 20 minutes ago. The Carrera GT's beauty is truly timeless. Everything from the simplified front end, to the aggressively sculpted doors, to the muscular rear with its active rear spoiler, works to accentuate the fact that this is one of the greatest cars of all time. And that's just the bodywork. The engine underneath that chiseled cover is a work of art in its own right. A naturally aspirated 5.7-litre V10, famously developed from an engine Porsche had originally designed in secret for the Footwork F1 team a decade earlier. Then there's the interior, which oozes style and only serves to add to the Carrera GT's sense of occasion. This car looks like it belongs in a museum, or perhaps an art gallery, which makes it all the more mouth-watering when you get to see one out on the road. Shortly after the arrival of the Carrera GT, Audi started work on its own mid-engine supercar. Based on a Lamborghini Gallardo, the Audi R8 was a fresh idea for the marque, and while it might not possess the kind of iconic styling others on this list have in spades, we think it deserves a place on this list. For the avoidance of doubt, we're talking exclusively about the original R8 from 2006. It's perhaps more of an acquired taste, but life would be boring if we all like the same things. As one of the more modern cars on this list, it features much more aggressive styling, with angular shapes and straight lines making up the majority of the R8's details. The bold contrast panel behind the doors is a point of interest, but overall the proportions work extremely well. The R8 follows the trend of limiting the amount of visual fuss, with clean bodywork all round that makes it incredibly easy on the eye. The icing on the cake is of course the choice between a 4.2-litre V8 or a 5.2-litre V10 screaming in your ear, but there's no doubt the original Audi R8 is aging nicely. Another source of contention perhaps? The Mercedes-AMG GT might not immediately pop into your head when you think about Germany's most beautiful cars, but hear us out, because we think there's something to be said for its looks. We're talking about the original AMG GT here, because has there ever been such a thing as a decent sequel? It's now more than a decade since the AMG GT arrived on the market in 2014, as a spiritual successor to the somewhat less beautiful SLS AMG. Harking back to the 300 SL with its long bonnet and sloping rear end, the AMG GT immediately captured the imagination with muscular proportions and unflustered design. That curved shape is distinct and brave and doubled down on Mercedes-AMG's 60s inspiration. The big gaping air intakes at the front are perhaps the only blemish on a design that generally does little else wrong. Despite that, the AMG GT is sleek, clean, and, yes, it's beautiful. It's all just a facade though, because that twin-turbocharged 4.2-litre V8 is an absolute savage. And finally, you can never talk about German cars without mentioning the Porsche 911. But they all look the same! Yes, and we think there's quite a good reason for that. There is no car more iconic than the 911. Instantly recognisable around the world, even people who hate cars know what a 911 is. It's distinctive, endearing, and, yes, beautiful. The Porsche 911 is fundamentally a beautiful car. Simple yet elegant curves that mirror so many of the other cars featured on this list. We've once again given the plaudits to the original here because it's the purest and most naturally beautiful of the lineage. Its arrival in 1964 signalled the beginning of one of motoring's greatest stories, not to mention the introduction of Porsche's legendary flat-six engine. That, alone, makes the 911 a thing of unmatched beauty. And that's it, our pick of the 9 most beautiful German cars. Each one a stunning example of timeless design that deserves its place in an automotive art gallery. But which cars tug at your heartstrings? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything going on here at Goodwood Road and Racing.